looks like the 4.5 warm-up accidentally got left off, so this video is going to go over the 4.5 warm-up. And it starts by looking at this graph in Desmos. And I recommend actually pulling up that specific link because we have it all set up so that we can see the vertical asymptotes, the x-intercept, and the function. So, in looking at our function, we've graphed f of t, where f of t is 2 times the quantity t minus 1 divided by the quantity t minus 4 times the quantity t plus 2. And if we look at our graph, this graph is going to help us answer the questions in the warm-up. So the things I asked about in the warm-up are, where were the vertical where were the vertical asymptotes on the graph? Where do we find that in the function? Where was the 0 on the graph, and how do we see that in the function equation, the actual equation? So, in looking at this graph, we can see one of our asymptotes is this vertical blue dashed line. It's located at t equals -2, and we have another one at t equals 4. And so if we look at the equation, we can see that those values are going to be related to the denominator of our function, the bottom. Looking at the x-intercept, the root, the 0, whatever you'd like to call it, that's at the point 1, 0. And we can see that that's related to this t minus 1 that's in the numerator. So, in filling out the 4.5 warm-up, we saw that the vertical asymptotes were at t equals 4 and t equals -2, and that's related to the denominator. The 0 was at 1, 0, and that was related to the numerator of our equation. Then, when it asks us to find the domain, we know that we have a rational function, so we know, based on what we studied in chapter 4, that we need to make sure that the denominator isn't 0. If it's 0, we're dividing by 0, and all is bad. I used to have a teacher that would say it that way, and it has stuck with me this long. So, to find the domain, we're going to find the values that make the denominator 0. And in this particular case, we either have that t can be 4, or that t is -2. So if we have that t is 4, or if we have that t is -2, our denominator is 0, and that's bad. We can't divide by 0. So these are actually, since we're here, I saw a question in the week 5 Q&A board. These are actually the values for which our function f of t is undefined. They're the values that make the denominator 0, that make the bottom 0. So we want to take those out of the domain, meaning we can plug in whatever we want except 4 and except -2. So to do that, we're going to use the parentheses, right? Parentheses means don't include. And we're going to do it again with 4. So this is how we would write the domain in interval notation. Thus, to kind of summarize, we saw that if we wanted to find the vertical asymptotes, or really those are also the values that are excluded from the domain, right? These were the same values as our vertical asymptotes. To find those, we look in the denominator, And if we wanted to find the zeros, also called x-intercepts, we look in the numerator. And then the last question of the warm-up, we have an equation, and we have 4 different lines of reasoning, and we're asked which ones are on the right track. So we start by looking at our equation. K of x is this function. And I would just go through them one by one and see if we agree with them. So A says x equals -2 and x equals -4 are not in the domain because they make the denominator 0. I agree with that. Right? If you're dividing by 0, the function is not defined. So they would not be in the domain. Therefore, we would write the domain like so. So we're going to take out -4 using parentheses, and then we're going to take out -2 out of the domain using parentheses, because parentheses means we exclude. So I also agree with B. And I agree with C. Right? We saw that the values that make the denominator 0, they're the same as the vertical asymptotes. And then D, x equals -2 and x equals -4 must be in the domain because that's where the vertical asymptotes are. No, right? We already said they're not in the domain. In fact, vertical asymptotes, these happen where the function is not defined. Okay, hopefully you found that helpful for that 4.5 warm-up.